So about me, I am calling today from sunny Northern California, and I say that with the utmost irony. Um, I am a mother of a 16-year-old human baby and two fur babies, and I work full time for a company which is helping to improve the user experience of government websites, such as the VA website, Veterans Affairs. Um, and on top of that, I'm a business person. I do web design and development and accessibility consulting. Um, yeah, I don't think it's sunny anywhere on the West Coast. And that's sad because I like springtime and barbecue. In my spare time, I do barbecue, and I like to watch sports, and I like to talk smack with my friends about sports because many of my friends have the habit of rooting for the wrong sports team, and they need to be told that that is not acceptable behavior. But anyway, the topic of my presentation is not sports, nor is it barbecue, nor is it the lack of sunshine. It is disability. And what the heck is this thing we call disability? Well, disability is kind of a misnomer. We're all humans traveling around on this spinning globe we call planet Earth, and we are all doing the best we can. Some of us do that best we can differently. Rather than seeing the things that are on a computer screen, for example, we hear things through a speech synthesizer. Some of us use closed captioning rather than hearing what people are saying. Some of us actually see what people are saying read out or written out for them. There are myriad of ways in which we can perceive the world and interact with the world. You know, some people use wheelchairs. Some people use speech to text, not to be confused with text to speech. My computer talks to me. Some people talk to their computers. Well, I talk to my computer too, but that doesn't help with any of its functionality. So how many people have disabilities? It really depends on what statistic you believe. You know how statistics are. There are innumerable statistics that all seem to contradict each other, but the consensus is that about 25% of us have some form of disability that they admit to. This does not count people who don't want to admit they have a disability or those who have temporary or situational disabilities. You can have a disability temporarily, like say you have surgery. You can be disabled by a situation, and I'm mentally doing those air quotes things when I say disabled. For example, a common situation would be holding a toddler, right? I mean, you don't have access to, you can't use one arm, maybe two arms, your brain. It's a situation that really forces you to focus on the toddler, and you're not necessarily focusing on what you're doing. So the easier it is to accomplish the other things you're doing, the better. That can be called a situational disability. So I hope you see the importance of including people with disabilities in what you're doing, or making things accessible to people with disabilities. There are many ways that you can do that actually don't just help people with disabilities. And I'm going to give you a perfect example. During the course of my high school and college days, I had the pleasure of taking numerous math classes. And you know how math professors are, right? They get up there and you can hear the chalk scraping on the chalkboard, and you hear the professor say something like, okay, so you take this and you add it to this and you divide it by this, and you move this over here, and okay, this is your answer. Not helpful. So before all the math classes, because I am such a meek and mild and quiet little church mouse, I would go up to the professor and say, "Hey, I'm blind. Would you please describe what you're doing on the board? Can you verbalize the steps as you're doing them so I can follow them in my head?" And without fail, I promise you, every single math class I took, somebody came up to me and thanked me, because the verbalization of the things that were on the board actually helped them. And these are sighted people. So I've often heard the argument made that, oh, well, if I don't know that there's a blind person, I don't necessarily need to verbalize things. I don't necessarily need to pay attention to non-visuals. But that's simply not true. My sighted classmates who came up and thanked me were greatly benefited by non-visuals. People who are looking in another direction, maybe they're watching a toddler. Speaking of toddlers, maybe they're driving. Case in point, right there. Perfect. Thank you very much for that. And I'm assuming that you're sighted, right? So, perfect. So at this point, I've covered pretty rapidly. I've covered quite a bit of material. And so I'd like to open it up at this point to questions. And I know Michelle is our chat monitor extraordinaire. And I'm also going to ask her to tell me when somebody raises their hand to ask a question, because JAWS does not. So I'm going to ask Michelle to do that. So if anybody has any questions,
or comments. If anyone has any comments or experiences they'd like to share, we'd love that.
Sure, absolutely.
I have one. I'll start. I have a question. I'm curious because the statistic that you shared was 25% of people have disability. Are there some disabilities that are more common than others, or what would you say how does that work? Because there are so many. What would you say?
Of course, naturally, disability also exists on a continuum. So there's some people, for example, who are totally blind, and some people who are low vision. But the important thing isn't necessarily how common each disability is. The important thing is that all of the disabilities exist, and humans who experience all these disabilities are out there, and we as business people need to take them into account.
Yeah. And I see a couple people with hands. Let me ask you this question that kind of connects that too. And then we see Daniel and then Jane. So real quick, my son, who was 28 at the time, was diagnosed with glaucoma, and very, very scary. And he lost like 60% of his peripheral vision in his left eye. While he was going through that, he had just started a new job, and he had to go to doctor's appointments. Plus, he wasn't really feeling good. And it was a disability that we did not tell him to reveal to his employer, sadly enough, right? Because we weren't sure how they would respond. So that made us become even more sensitive to being aware and sensitive to so many different kinds of disabilities. Let me ask Daniel to go ahead and ask his question, and then after that, Jane, you're next on deck.
Yeah, before I get to my serious comments, I'll go back to Angela's point about sports teams and say that
I knew that was coming.
Since my Guardians swept her Rockies last year, the interesting thing about this is, I think to Angela's broader point, I can tell you that the vast majority of disabilities are actually invisible. So when you think of things like people who use wheelchairs or blind or deaf, that's a part of the population, but chronic pain, other serious
Mhm.
chronic illnesses, mental conditions are actually a very high percentage of people with disabilities. And even within that, back to Angela's broader point, for example, we are two blind people who access the world very differently, even among ourselves. And
Yep.
so it really comes back to, it really comes back to understand, you know, opening up things so that the environment is designed with all kinds of human needs in mind, and really causes us to examine our own preconceived notions. That's
You're kind of breaking up a little bit there, Daniel.
yeah, sorry, voiceover messed up with my sound. I would say that there is a wide swath of experiences even within, say, blindness. Angela and I, although we are both blind, experience the world very differently.
Mhm.
There's even a wider spectrum beyond that. But also, we I think that underscores the need to design an environment, both virtually and physically, with all kinds of human needs in mind, but also to really examine a lot of our assumptions and preconceived notions, because oftentimes they lead us to conclusions that could otherwise be avoided. So that's why topics like this one are so necessary.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Thank you.
yeah, and to that point, big in-person networking events are challenging, right? I think they're challenging for everybody. They just are, but they're particularly challenging for blind people. And Dan and I got into a conversation at one point about how we handle those events, and it turns out the way in which we handle them is completely obvious, completely opposite, completely different from each other. Um, Besides being blind, I have a hearing loss. So sitting behind a table, which puts me several feet away from the person I'm talking to, that doesn't work. So if I'm tabling, I can do that, but I'm actually better getting up and actually walking around and working the room. Whereas, other blind people might actually do better tabling
Mm-hmm.
because they can just focus on who's in front of them. You don't have to worry about, well, where am I in relation to everybody and everything else? You could just focus on what's in front of you. Where I can't hear what's in front of me with the doggone table in the way, so I got to get up and work the room.
Interesting.
So,
Angela, we have got some interest here. So we've got Jane who's next, and then Jennifer raised her hand. But before we come to you, Jennifer, I'd like to address some things that are in chat. So Angela, I got some good interest going on. Jane, can you go ahead and ask your question?
Yes, Angela, and I want this for clarification as you're talking to us. And if we're putting messages in the chat, like there's a lot of content in the chat right now, you're hearing all of that, correct?
I am hearing all of it, and now what I'm doing is I'm actually tapping the control key to mute it. I forgot to turn off notifications.
Yeah, I wondered if you were having to hear, you're hearing everything coming in the chat and you're trying to talk, you're listening to people. There's a lot more going on here than those of us with sight will realize. And I think I just learned something, is to be very cognizant of what I put in the chat as you were talking, because as you just mentioned, you're hearing it all. So that's interesting. Thank you.
And it's the benefit is that I can respond in kind to chat messages when I pick up on them. I can actually respond to them in real time. The drawback is that I hear each and every notification when somebody leaves, when somebody when somebody comes in. You can disable that in JAWS, but I forgot to look up the shortcut and I can't remember what it is. You cannot disable that in VoiceOver.
Got it.
Interesting. I'm glad you asked that because I was wondering that too. Hey, here's a question from Denise, Angela. And Denise, I'm glad you asked that because I was wondering this too. The question is, how can I ensure my website or pages are accessible? What are a couple of points for me to think about when marketing?
We are actually going to get into that because I have a couple websites queued up right now, one of which is pretty accessible and the other needs some help.
Okay. Okay, good. So we're going to stay tuned on that. And then Linda has some statistics in here, kind of a lot of statistics. A recent study found that 88% of people with invisible disability had negative views of disclosing their disability to employers, of a fear of being labeled. That's consistent with what I said about my son. So any thought or comment on that, Angela?
I do, actually. And it's sad. And it speaks to the ignorance out there in society. I said earlier that disability is a misnomer because so many people associate disability with lack of disability. But I'm kind of a snarky person. And to that, I would respond, don't diss my ability. People don't know. People just don't know. And we as a society need to normalize disability so that it becomes acceptable to be blind, cool to be blind, respectable to be blind, or to be, to have whatever the thing is. Because it really is. It's just a part of the human existence. And if you don't have a disability, you probably know somebody who does. And I hope that if you live long enough, you're probably going to have a disability. So I hope you all have a disability because that means you will have lived a long life. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, thank you. Jennifer, what's your thought or question?
Actually, I have a couple. First is, what can we do? And you may be getting into this later, but I'm in human resources. I'm always inviting people to meetings, whether they're in person or on WebEx, a local SHRM chapter, for example. And we ask people, do you have any food allergies we need to accommodate for if we're serving a meal? What can we do by way of part of the invitation so that we do know that if someone has and what is the correct nomenclature? Because it's not necessarily a disability, but it's needs an accommodation or would like to.
What I would say first, and obviously, you want to give people an option to state their needs, their accommodation needs. Thank you. But they might not want to do that. They might be one of the 80%. So shoot for access first. So you mentioned food allergies. If you have a variety of different things available, then people with food allergies can pick and choose. Now, again, there's things like, peanut allergies and things like that that definitely need to be, accommodated for. Because we're getting into some really serious stuff there. But generally speaking, if people, for example, describe things non-visually, verbalize things, whether there's a blind person there or not, that is access. That means that if a blind person happens to show up at the last minute, they have the same access to everything else. If somebody who isn't blind but who benefits from verbal descriptions is there and doesn't want to necessarily speak, or doesn't want to be the me that goes up and says, you need to describe things. They don't have to. They have access to everything because it's being described. Accommodation is what happens when access fails. And sometimes access fails through no fault of its own, and sometimes access fails because we did not make things accessible.
That's a great point. Some in the group already know this. So I have a learning disability, and people just thought I was slow or dumb or couldn't spell and no sense of direction. A lot of things that materialized while I was growing up. And it wasn't until I was diagnosed my freshman year of college that things began to make sense. And I got tutoring and learned to read all over again and learned to compensate. And so now when I go into a job, like I'm head of HR for my company, I'm responsible for benefits and payroll and a lot of other things. I simply went to the CFO and said, hey, I have dyslexia. I will always try to check my work. However, I'm going to let you know that I need extra time to have somebody check behind me so that I don't make a mistake in payroll. I don't make a mistake in benefits. Absolutely. I am very collaborative, and I will bring in my team. And when that really hit home was about 6.5 years ago, when I suffered a traumatic brain injury and was not allowed to have any visual stimulation and had to do and couldn't handle, and I still can't handle loud noises and bright lights, had to have people speak very softly to me and call me or record things. And that brought a whole new level and a whole new sense of adaptability and of asking for what I need.
And people don't realize that, there is this phenomenon that occurs in restaurants that causes pain for many. It's called music.
Yes. I travel with earplugs everywhere I go.
Don't get me wrong. I love music when I don't need to listen to anything else.
Yes.
But, people don't realize when they play the music, in restaurants or in big networking area things, right? I was talking about big networking things earlier. When there's music playing, it is really hard for me as a blind person and for other folks as well to navigate those environments. So music in those situations is more disabling than blindness, more disabling than learning disability, because we could do just fine without it.
That's very interesting. And the other thing I'm thinking of is I am a very in disc speak, I'm very high I. I talk with my hands, my facial expression, my body language. So as you're speaking, I'm nodding my head, and I'm, and I'm like, okay, how is this
I do the same thing, and I'm blind. So what can I say?
How is this helpful for you? It's not affirming what you're saying. You don't know what my reaction is. But then if we all come off mute and we're all talking at the same time, that's not helpful either.
And sometimes when I'm giving a presentation or speaking at work, somebody will be like, "Yep, I'm seeing a lot of smiles here," or Angela, people are shaking their heads. You might want to click, whatever the thing is, and just bake in this non-visual information just as sort of a part of the conversation.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. That's great advice.
Okay, so Angela, thank you so much. Good dialogue, good conversation. I love it. I'm learning a lot. And by the way, you might have seen Angela, but you got some nods in here, that you're inspiring, that they love your words. So you might have already know that, but just to affirm that.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. So let's let you carry on with your presentation right now. And I know you had some things to share about websites that you mentioned.
Yeah, so it's 10:30, so this will be brief. And I am going to share my screen. Oh. Would somebody be so kind as to allow me to share my screen? Got to make this accessible to sighted people, don't you know?
Exactly. Let's see.
All right.
Okay.
You're set, Angela. You're a co-host now.
Firm best mattress prices. Top home the pieces of the foundation. Google Chrome.
So this actually happens to be Dan's nonprofit's website.
Participants can now see your screen.
And I know it works with screen readers because I helped build it.
Control Shift page down.
Oh.
Slower. Slower.
And in
Home.
the name of making things accessible to sighted people, I am going to turn down the voice. So I'm going to tab through this website for just a couple seconds.
Home the pieces of the foundation. Open accessibility toolbar button.
So the first thing you come to is an accessibility toolbar. Now this accessibility toolbar is not like some of the accessibility products out there. This accessibility toolbar actually allows sighted people to change the visual presentation of the screen. So invert colors, change the font, a number of visual things that they can do. This is completely different from an accessibility overlay, which I will get into in a moment.
From Ryan to close to everyone. I am on.
Okay.
Skip the content, same page link.
So this is a skip link. So if you want to skip over the navigation and just get to the good stuff, you can.
Banner region, link. Visited heading level 1, link the pieces of the foundation.
So
Menu button expanded.
So the one thing that you notice is that the menu button is properly labeled. And that
Link about US. Link. Donate through PayPal heading level 5. Pieces of link book a free 30-minute conversation. Link July is Disability Pride Month SBU News.
as I go through these links,
Link American Bar Association. Celebrate. Link 5 simple tricks for becoming a better ally.
I can tell just by landing on these links what the links do or where they go. I call this purpose and target.
So Angela, is there a way that you can make Dan's website full screen? Because we, us limited sighted people are only seeing a tiny itsy bitsy little screen. And it's hard for us to follow you. There we go. That's
That
perfect.
better?
Thank you.
Okay, great. So,
Same page link, skip the content.
oh,
Slower. Slower.
rascal.
The pieces of the foundation at link book a free 30-minute link July is Disability Pride Month SBU News.
So I'm gonna
Wrapping the top name group first edit required enter main.
I'm gonna tab through the newsletter subscription form as well, and you'll see as I do that.
Last edit required. Email edit required as pop-up. Submit button.
I know what is required. I can also jump to an image.
Disability Pride flag and Thunderbolt pattern with black background graphic.
And I know exactly what it is because there's a proper alt text. Now I'm going to close this out.
Close document window button contains text. Day presentation outline. TXT notepad edit. Jaws home and mattress firm best mattress prices top brand same day delivery. Slower.
One time I contemplated getting a mattress from these guys because they're advertised on a podcast that I listened to. And I couldn't do it. I literally could not place the order because things weren't labeled properly. The add to cart feature, the feature where you actually chose your accessories and whatnot was completely cattywampus. I don't even know what they did. And at the time, it doesn't have it now. But at the time, this website actually had an accessibility overlay. And what an accessibility overlay is supposed to do is it is supposed to automatically correct accessibility defects on your web page. But all too often it does not work. So I hit the button at the time to turn screen reader mode on, and absolutely nothing changed. So now, while the website isn't any more accessible, at least they took the accessibility overlay off, so they're not pretending. So the first thing you'll notice.
F. Title is mattress for F. F blank. F.
Is that JAWS automatically put me in
Virtual
forms
PC
mode.
cursor.
So instead of doing what
Mattress.
I wanted to do, I ended up typing in the field. Okay.
Unlabeled 0 button.
This menu button, I assume it's a menu button, is unlabeled.
Link 766,693.
This link says 766,000 whatever, and that has no context. That has no purpose and it has no target. Now, if I go up and read the line above it.
Text mattress 2. Please enter a valid email. Text mattress 2. Link to receive text alerts.
So that's the deal. But what a lot of people will do,
mattress unlabeled.
What a lot of screen reader users will do, and I'm going to open up this menu if I can.
Both your pressure smart trademark 2.0
so that I can
starting at $799.99, $999.9985 delivery by Mar 18 of it. Skip the main
Thank you.
Previous item button. Next item button. Susan K. Younger has left the meeting. Slower. Slower.
This website is so annoying, it's hard to demonstrate. What we can do is we can open up a links list.
JAWS version 2000, free and fast delivery on select mattress.
And again, Angela, can you make that full screen for us?
F11.
Did it work?
Try one more time.
Escape. For F11 alert.
There we go.
Here we go.
Thank you.
Links list view. Free mat 800 card 5 of 60. Queen 5,600,000. Mattresses 7 of 63. Beds and frames 8 of sale 9 of bedding 10 of 63. Pillows 11 of 63.
Some of these are labeled and some of them aren't. But you can see how a blind person, you can see why it's so important to label links properly. To make sure that graphics are labeled. And
escape.
The best way, and I'm going to get out of here.
Close document window. JAWS home manual. Day presentation outline. TXT.
I don't want to spend any more time on this inaccessible website than I have to.
Alt S, your screen share.
The best way to ensure that your website is accessible is to test it with people with disabilities, to test it with the screen reader users, with people with low vision. There's a number of things you can do. There's tests that you can run yourself, and that's a whole different conversation. But the best way to do it is to test it with people with disabilities.
And you're responding to Rebecca's question, which was, are there tools to recommend to test accessibility for websites?
Well, yeah. So there are automatic accessibility checkers. One of which that I use is called Axe. And I'm not sure how to spell it, but it's a Google Chrome extension, and these automatic checkers will catch about 30% of accessibility defects. You can also do a quick screen reader test. Just turn on a screen reader. There are free screen readers that you can use. NVDA, which stands for non-visual desktop access for people like me who are academically challenged, is a good free screen reader. You can just tab through your website and see if it works. Another important thing that you can do is you can make sure that all your elements can be used with the keyboard. So you can actually do a keyboard test. Put your mouse away. Don't cheat. I tell people they can have it back after the test is done, and just go through everything with a keyboard and make sure that it all works, and make sure that it's focused, and make sure that the focus order makes sense.
Angela Denise has her hand up.
Sure, go ahead.
So on that website that I guess this mattress firm,
Yeah.
it looked like they tried to have some kind of accessibility to it. Is it because they programmed it wrong, or is there a program that they bought that just isn't working today?
Yeah, they bought an accessibility overlay program, and those things oftentimes do not work.
Okay.
People, and this is not the case with all of them, but this is the case with many of them. They will tell you that your website is compliant. They will sell you compliance. They will say, buy our software and you will not get sued. But the problem is their software doesn't work. So you buy their software and you trust them, and your website is still not accessible. I mean, I feel bad for people that do this because they're trying to do the right thing, but it just doesn't have the right result.
So I guess even whatever you buy, you definitely have to test the program multiple times and in multiple browsers.
Well, yeah, you do. But the best thing to do is to work with web designers that design and developers that build websites accessibly. Because if you build your website accessibly from the ground up, then it is a lot easier to keep it accessible.
Thank you, Angela.
No problem. Let's see. It's 10:42. We've got about 18 minutes. So I'm just going to open it up for questions at this point. Please feel free to ask any question that comes to mind, even the one you're afraid to ask, because how else are we going to learn?
What are some of the other platforms, Angela, beyond a website that we as business owners, business founders, business leaders should be thinking about in terms of providing accessibility? So you showed the differences between two different websites, which I really appreciate. Although we didn't go into a lot of detail about what made those two websites very different, I'm hearing that primarily your recommendation is don't buy some sort of disability overlay out of the box without testing it. And two, make sure you're testing it with someone who may be, have some sort of hearing disability or sight disability,
right?
And ensure that it really does work in the way that it needs to, in both form and function, that it really does allow the content to be truly accessible. It sounded as though the navigation links for one website were clearly labeled. The navigation links for the second website were not clearly labeled. And that is a stumbling block, but that's just one of many issues that need to be taken into consideration to make a website accessible. Well, what are some of the other platforms besides a website that we should be thinking about in terms of social media, or in terms of video, or in terms of other forms of content that we may be using to explain our business?
The one that people don't think about is paperwork. Every time you go somewhere, do something, sneeze, you have to sign something, right? And putting a piece of paper in front of a blind person and saying, here, sign this, really isn't helpful. And we don't always have a resident sighted person available to help us. And when I do, it's usually my mom, and she almost always forgets her reading glasses. So, she has almost as much trouble as I do. So there are accessible e-signature platforms out there. E-signature, for example, DocuSign's pretty good. And I'm not a lawyer, but I have it on good authority that if you use these platforms, you are legally covered. And if I'm wrong, well, that's why I have Dan to steer me right on these things. But if you don't have that system in place, or if it's just not practical, you know, train your staff to help out in a case like that. You know,
Angela, to kind of add to the question that Linda asked, I'm sure a lot of us really use LinkedIn a lot. I know I do. So are they already set up where when we post and comment and such, it's appropriate for a person who doesn't have sight?
right, social media. So there are a couple of things with social media. GIFs, generally speaking, GIFs and memes are inaccessible. There is a Facebook group called Memes and Jokes for Blind Folks where they describe the memes so that we get the joke as well, and it's really cool. Because some of those things are pretty doggone funny. But the little giffies you see and animated goofy things you see aren't accessible in the main. Pictures, please add alt text to them. And there is a way, and each social media platform allows you to do that. I know Facebook does, Instagram does. I'm pretty sure LinkedIn does as well. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah. Definitely, please do describe. And if you don't know how to add an alt text, describe the image in the body of the message. You know, in the post, that'll work too.
Good tip. Thank you.
Dan's got his hand up, so he can fill in anything I'm missing because I'm probably missing something.
I was just going to add to it, you know, when Christy and I started Pieces, and for those of you who don't know, Christy is my sighted cousin who co-founded the nonprofit with me. You know, I was working with her on making sure that all of our images that we posted were accessible, and it really struck me how much she struggled with overthinking alt text.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to take a moment here and say it doesn't have to be, you know, National Geographic level detail. You know, if it's workable, if it reasonably conveys the message, there's a lot of grace there. We'd much rather an incomplete or an imperfect or just quite frankly a messed up alt text compared to nothing at all.
Exactly.
And to add to that point, you know, the other one that's been popular on social media that really has been irksome is there's a trend to have maybe these video clips with words on a screen and music playing in the background. Voiceover and JAWS, whatever, will not pick up on those. We hear the music, we hear the pretty music and miss out on everything else. There are ways to get around that, such as incorporating optional audio description on those videos so that those who need to have the words read aloud can be, but it doesn't disturb the visual aesthetic for those who would prefer to just read the words on the screen. And I had another thought, but it just escaped me. And just kind of throwing out there too, when we're talking about alt text and some of these other things, I think it's also useful to highlight that it's not just for the approximately 10 to 15 million Americans with visual impairment or blindness. It also extends to people with other kinds of disabilities. But I think the other business side of this is, you know, alt text improves SEO significantly. You
Exactly.
know, the tools that Google uses to determine what is on a web page are largely the same as what we use to read the web page. So if it's not picked up by a screen reader user, it's generally not getting picked up on by Google either.
Yep.
Interesting.
And in the main, everything that you do, and I'll give you another example, closed captions. When I worked for a community, I worked for a community college before I started doing all this stuff. And one of the things that I did was I closed captioned a lot of the instructional videos that professors were using. And it not only helped people who were deaf and hard of hearing, it helped people for whom English is a second language. It helped people with audible processing, who just couldn't process information auditorily. It even helped people improve their reading. So in the main, everything that you do to make things more accessible to people with disabilities is going to help people without disabilities. In the main, everything that you do to make your website accessible is going to help your sales score. It's not. I like to say it's not just for us blind people over here. You're not just helping out those poor blind people. You're helping out you're helping everybody out.
Inclusive. I have a question too, Angela. And so when I'm creating PowerPoint presentations, sometime there'll be a message that comes up and says, "How would you describe this?" And I really never have done anything on that. But as I'm listening,
ask yourself this: what do you want me to get out of the image? What information do you want me to take from the image?
Mm-hmm.
And it really is an art. It's not a science.
Mm-hmm. And so when I ask myself that question, how do I make sure I convey it correctly?
Maybe I should do another presentation on alt text, because and I'm not joking. This really is, we can really get out into the weeds on this, but let me give you a couple of examples.
Okay.
If it is a graph showing statistical trends, you can verbalize the trends during your presentation. And then you can do one of two things. You can list the trends in the text portion of your slides, and simply in your alt text say graph showing statistical, trends of, whatever the thing is. Or if you can do it briefly, you can highlight the trends in your alt text. So graph showing general increase in, caffeine consumption for fragile business leaders, or whatever the thing is.
Mm-hmm.
If it is a picture, simply say what the picture is of.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay.
Picture of lighthouse.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Picture of cute fuzzy puppy, whatever the situation is.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other questions in the chat.
We've got 6 minutes, so I can give you the rest of your time back, or if anybody has any other questions, I would be. And if you have any questions, if you want to set up a meeting with me, because I know I touched on a lot of stuff. I know there was a lot. We can go a lot deeper into some of this stuff than we did. There are other disability related things, considerations that I didn't even touch on. So if you want to email me, she'll send my email address out in the follow up. I would be happy to schedule some time to talk. You can email me whatever questions you have, if because you never remember the questions until after you get off the call, right? And then you're like, oh man, I should have asked this. I'm going to create a more professional looking outline of this presentation than this scattered list of notes that I've got on my computer right now. And I'll send it to Linda. She can make it available to you.